Welcome to Mr. Investor, the Real Estate Dojo. Today's topic is about how does the transaction look like at closing when a buyer needs a loan from a bank but the seller owns their house free and clear. Okay. When I search online, there's not that much diagram that helps you visualize to see the whole transaction that happens on the back end at the escrow company. So I wanted to go ahead and draw some stone figures, if you may say, to help you digest the information, because it helps me digest the information when I make it as simple as possible, like Steve Jobs says with Apple. Okay, to make things simple is hard. Okay, now let's go ahead and dive in here and get a better understanding what happens in a transaction when the borrower or the buyer needs to borrow money or get a loan from the bank to buy a house that's free and clear. Okay, so we have this big institution here called the lender. Okay, and then over here we have the buyer. In this case, it could be you, or it could be just anybody that's buying a real estate property, okay? And then we have a situation here where we have a motivated seller, or it could be any kind of seller. But as an investors, we're targeting motivated sellers. That's what I'm teaching you at this boot camp, is how to find motivated sellers. So as a buyer investor, you're going to do some marketing, and these sellers were going to call you. Okay? And when that happens, you're going to use the Mr. Investor Seller Questionnaire forms to interview the seller and determine who's motivated and who's not. Okay? And once you find the motivated sellers like this seller, you're going to talk to them and put their house on the contract. And what you're going to do is create a win-win situation. And what happens is that the seller will meet you halfway, and you will meet the seller halfway, and you put the house on a contract to buy, or a real estate purchase agreement. I'm just going to say contract for right now. Okay? And you're going to say, assuming, like, let's say you're going to buy this property for $100K. What happens is that most buyers don't have cash, or if they do have cash, if you're an investor and you don't want to use your cash, you want to leverage. So what's going to happen is you would have to go to a lender or a bank. And what you would do is that you would fill out an application, an app. If you get approved, then before the lender will lend you the money, a couple of things need to happen. So what's going to happen is that you have to give the lender a promissory note. So you're going to have to sign personally for this note. And what is a note? It's basically an IOU. Okay, refer back to the general terms video to understand what a note is. Okay, so in a nutshell, the buyer is going to give the lender or the bank a note that says, hey, I'm going to pay you X amount of dollars for 30 years at Y% interest rate, okay? Whatever that note is, okay? At the same time, you are going to give the bank a deed of trust, what I call DOT, okay? And basically a deed of trust is a security instrument that you pledge to the lender as collateral for them to lend you the money. So if you default on the note, the lender is going to use the deed of trust to foreclose on you and get their property back to sell to get their initial investment money back. Okay? So basically, two things that are going to happen that you're going to give to the lender is that you're going to sign a note to the lender, personally guaranteeing it, and then you are going to give the lender a deed of trust, which is a security instrument that you pledge the property for in case you default on the note, okay? Now, do those two things. What the lender's going to do is the lender's going to give you cash. And what you're going to do is you're going to give the cash to the seller. Why are you going to give the cash to the seller? Because you want to buy this house. And in return for the cash, according to the contract, the seller is going to deed you his property, or the seller is going to convey to you his property, or the seller is going to transfer his ownership rights to you, okay, through the deed. Okay, so in a nutshell, what happens at closing with the buyer that needs to get a loan is that the buyer will get in a contract with the seller. The buyer will not have the cash, so he has to go to a lender. The first thing he's going to do is fill out an application. Once he gets approved, the buyer has to do two things: sign a promissory note, and then sign the deed of trust, which is a security instrument that the buyer volunteers to pledge the property or the house as collateral for the note. Once those three things happen, then the lender is going to fund the buyer with money, which therefore the buyer uses that money to pay for the seller's house, and then the seller will convey the deed to the buyer. And all this happens right here in escrow. Okay? And that's what escrow happens. Now, this is a quick overview of how a buyer that needs a loan buys a house with the seller that owns the house.